Hello, I'm Frank Conkling, and this is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. Specifically, we're talking about the parcel fabric today. And so what we're going to talk about is a little bit different than what we do. Usually it's a lot of technology, but with today's workshop, it's going to be in the beginning, we're going to talk about conceptual and data models. And then at the end, we're going to show you some technology of how to implement some of this in here. All right. And so before we start, real quickly, we are Panda Consulting. If you want to know about us, go ahead out to our website. There's a QR code there for it. And if you want to know about these events, there's an events page, again, which is listed in a calendar view. There's also in a workshop view, there's a way to go and list all of them. On the list on the workshop area, you can actually go and it links you over to the YouTube channel, and it links you to actual downloads where you can download the full length, higher definition information on here. And our YouTube channel, please go out there and look at it. We're seeing a lot of people coming, especially even from overseas. We have now somewhere around 72 different videos out there. You're going to see us in the upcoming year go and add more and more information on our website as far as how to find them and which ones might be helpful to you, almost as free training. So please go ahead and do that. Also, before I start, I want to let you know, for those of you who are in attendance right now, if you have questions or comments, please put them over in the chat window. Chris with our office is moderating that, and he will go and try to answer the questions, or he'll go and interrupt me to make sure that you get everything addressed that you can. So let's start. So what is the local government information model? The local government information model is a data model that's set up for land records. It was initially introduced with ArcMap and structured initially for ArcMap, and specifically for the ArcMap parcel fabric. And one of the problems with that was that it was constrained with the way the ArcMap parcel fabric worked, in which within the ArcMap parcel fabric, everything was in a single geometry type. So all of the attribution for all the different parcel types, they were all stored in one polygon feature class, and it was confusing for a lot of people. That's gone. But the important thing to remember is that the local government information model consists of various parcel types, and these are all types that you really need in order to be able to go and do accurate and good quality parcel mapping. It includes parcel types for the public land survey systems, the non-colonial states or the non-meets and bounds states in the United States, but with the ArcGIS parcel fabric, it means you don't have to go and use this. You have flexibility. And one of the things that's come out is because with the ArcGIS parcel fabric, ESRI has stopped talking about the local government information model. I've seen in talking with people a lot of confusion. Has ESRI abandoned the local government information model? And if I don't have it, why would I need it? Why do I need, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into somebody's office and have them said, we don't have lots. Why would I need lots? I'm dealing with tax parcels. That's all I'm really going to go and map. And we're going to talk about that. So just to let you know, the land records model, the local government information model, is based upon what appears in Nancy von Meyer's GIS and Land Records book, which is based upon the multi-purpose cadastre study that was done back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s by a federal government. It's a really good model. The only issue was because they introduced it with ArcMap, there was a lot of confusion about it. But it's a great model, especially for parcel mappers. So what we want to think about is that there's several parcel types which are identified in the LGIM. And the first set of those, what in the ArcMap parcel was types 1, 2, 3, and 4, These can be thought of as sort of the initial partitioning of land when it was beginning to be sold. This is what I refer to as the sovereign partitioning of the land. When the federal government still owned the land, or when it was English or Spanish or any of the other grants, when the federal government took over and it started selling off land, started selling those lands to pay the debt, they broke it down into townships, and they would send surveyors out, and the surveyor would be commissioned to go and to survey the entire township. So the main group was this township, and then from the township, it broke it down into sections. Then it broke that down further using a second division into quarter sections, and then even further special surveys, dependent and independent resurveys, and other components on it. So they're all different divisions or partitioning of the overall township. The township is the key inside the cadastral framework. There's also a parcel type grouping called simultaneous conveyance parcel types. This is the types of divisions or partitioning that occurred once it was in private hands. Once a private owner had it, they then had the ability to go and divide up the land to sell it off. And these are treated slightly different from the federal partitions, but they are still a way to go and partition land and get it recorded. So these simultaneous conveyance parcel types are things such as subdivisions and condominiums, and up in the Midwest in Wisconsin, you have certified survey maps. You have these types of divisions that go before an approving party. They get reviewed, they get put in place, and they get stored on the public records. That's how these come into play. And once that plat gets actually recorded, then all these smaller divisions inside, what are known as conveyance divisions, lots, tracts, private roads, units for condominiums and such, they come into existence all at once, simultaneously. They come into existence. And the simultaneous part has to do with how overages or shortages gets distributed on there. And because they were all created at the same time, they are all equally sharing in a proportionate share of those overages or shortages. But both the cadastral framework, again, this is a federal partitioning, and the simultaneous conveyance types, these really are not operational layers. These are reference layers. These are layers that once you put them into your data set, you really shouldn't update them much. You don't have to go and work on them every single day. It's only when you get a replat or you get some sort of corrective components to it that you actually interact with them. And again, these aren't the most problematic because most people work only on tax parcels. And so the question is, well, why would I want to go and have to do all the work to build these other components? And that's where you really have to understand how a legal description interpretation comes about. We recently had a client who gave us a deed and said, this deed actually was all of lot 26 and a portion that was described by meets and bounds of lot 27. Well, if you didn't have lot 27 actually mapped out and stored in your data, in order to recreate it, you'd have to go and get the original subdivision plat and then remap that original subdivision plat to rebuild it. Often some of our clients will say, well, I don't need the whole polygon. I only need that one line separating the two. And that's actually a false equivalency. You really need the entire area, because sometimes it's going to be from the north-south, sometimes it's going to be from east-west, sometimes it's going to be some other way of describing it. You really need to store what that overall original division of that subdivision looked like. All right, so these two types of of parcel types, the cadastral framework and the simultaneous conveyance parcel types. These really are just reference layers, or as it's referenced up in Wisconsin, these are foundational layers. You need them to actually do good mapping on there. But then we get into the ones which are more operational, the types of parcels that are worked on almost daily. These are the types of ownership in which you track not how was it divided, but who owns it, or who has a conveyance which says they have a right to use it. Because that's really what ownership is in land in the United States, is a right to use it. And the various types of ownership types that are included in the local government information model really deal with how much do they own, how much of what's commonly referred to as the bundle of rights, how much do they really own. For a tax parcel, believe it or not, what that represents is that you have an entity that is responsible for paying the taxes on that property. It honestly, and I've come across many instances where they actually don't even own the land. What they own is the right to pay the taxes on it. Or the ownership type in the local government information model, it actually refers to fee simple ownership. That's the greatest form of ownership. That's the one that contains almost all the rights in there. But I don't see very many organizations even looking to go and map fee simple ownership. There's just too much liability associated with it when you start telling somebody you own this and somebody else doesn't own it. Then let's move on to the next type of ownership. This is an encumbrance right. And this ownership right basically gives you the ability to use a parcel of land for some very limited use. This is only the right to go, for example, to use it for installation and maintenance of utilities, or drainage rights, or one of my favorite ones, the right of way, the right to go and travel across land. A right of way is actually a limited right. It's an encumbrance right out there. It's really not a fee simple conveyance unless it's specifically noted so on the deed. So that's an encumbrance type of parcel. And probably about half of our clients map encumbrances, the other half don't. And then finally, there's separated rights. Separated rights really have to do with financial use of the property. For example, if you have a lease or a grazing lease or a hunting lease or you have a right to use it, but it's only a right to use it. You don't have the right to go and build anything there. You don't have the right to go and sort of use it for a mortgage or anything else on there. This is a financial, short-term, limited use of the property on there. And while I'm not going to go into all the details of the local government information model, but no, that's the way it's broken down, is that the first two groups, the cadastral framework and the simultaneous conveyance groups, they're about how the land was divided up. They have nothing to do with ownership. They're always about how legally has this land been divided up at one time. All right. And then it's only once you get into the ownership types, tax parcel, ownership parcel, encumbrance, and separated rights. Those are the ones where you actually have, and you're assigning it to a private entity and saying, this entity actually has the right to use this. All right. Now that we understand these types of breakdowns in the local government information model. By the way, let me stop right here before we move into more of the technical side. Does anyone have any comments or any questions about the local government information model on here?
There's nothing in the chat currently.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, then let's just go. So then the question is, we know how it was introduced in ArcMap, but what about the ArcGIS parcel fabric? How can we do this with the ArcGIS parcel fabric? And let me go and say right here that what I'm going to show you is not exclusively in the fabric. but just how we've introduced it into the parcel fabric. Because of the heavy use of attribute rules, this can be done in just ArcGIS Pro. However, it does require attribute rules, which means the attribute rules means that you have to have branch versioning, you have to have a validation service against it. So you sort of have to move into Portal and have to move into that whole enterprise in order to be able to use attribute rules, in order to be able to go and put this type of a model in place. If you're going to do that, why not move all the way to the fabric, which is other benefits on it. So what I'm going to do is talk about how we use this in the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric. And what you're seeing here on the screen is this is actually a set of attribute rules that are assigned to the rules feature class. And if you note on here, and I apologize that the actual size of this, what we have is we have things like the records push the information to the townships, or the records push it to the sections and the quarter sections and such. And we'll explain that a little bit more as we're going. All right, so let's talk about a record. Many people, when they go and move into the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, are first, they're confused about what a record is. And until you actually use the fabric for a while, you really don't comprehend the full power of records. A record is a primary organizing element in the fabric, so that if you have many things that are related to a single partition, you can set it up that if you store the information in the record, you can then have it populated back down to the individual features that you created in there. But just remember, everything relates back to the record on here. All the connection lines, all of the points, all the polygons, all the lines in the parcel fabric, they must be associated with a record. All right. So what's the first thing that we wind up doing? Inside the record, we define that there's going to be 3 different types of records we're going to be dealing with. One is going to be the cadastral records. This is, again, that cadastral framework, the townships sections, quarter sections, and the government lots and any other special surveys. We're going to put everything into that type of a record. And what we're going to do is we're going to store on there all of here. We're going to store this. We're going to put the primary meridian, the township number, the direction number, the range number, direction, the PLSSID. So everything that goes along with a township, because remember, a township plat, when it was originally recorded, is a plat. It's a division of land within that township. Think about it as a really big subdivision plat that gets recorded, but it's recorded with the government land office, or now the Bureau of Land Management. They record that plat and say, this is the way everything is divided inside of there. And it goes according to the lines and the monuments that are placed on there. But it really is nothing more than a big division of land that's approved by the federal government, and then they start selling all their parcels off from there. That's the cadastral record. And then we have simultaneous conveyance records. These are subdivisions and condominiums. These are private divisions of land. And again, on here, you will see you have conveyance type, conveyance designation or designator. You have source, you have a plat subdivision name, and maybe you have a document reference on there also. You have the attribution for the simultaneous conveyances as part of that one grouping. And then finally, you have an ownership type of record. Those deal with private conveyances of ownership when they go back and forth. And on there, we really only have document reference. Again, this is an example. This is not the final one that everybody needs to do, but this is an example of what we've done. In looking at this, we could have, for example, gone to subtypes here instead of going to just regular attribution and coding it according to that. There's lots of different things we can do when we get into this more advanced data modeling. But I want to introduce this concept of what it is and how it works, that sort of thing from there. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and define 3 different types of records. We're going to define cadastral records, cadastral framework records. We're going to define simultaneous conveyance records, and then we're going to define ownership records. And then we're going to take the local government information model and stick them in accordingly to those, so that on here, the cadastral framework types will be townships, sections, second divisions or quarter sections and government lots, and then special surveys. Those are all going to go into the cadastral framework type. Simultaneous conveyance types, we're going to take the simultaneous conveyances, subdivisions, condominiums, and put that in there. And then the conveyance types or conveyance divisions, lots and tracts and private roads and condo units, those sorts of things are going to all go into that type of a record. And then finally, ownership types. We're going to take the tax parcel ownership and the fee simple ownership, the encumbrance or easement ownership and separated right ownerships. They're going to be attached to that type of a record on there. Okay, so that's sort of the gist of how we're going to do this. We're going to take our records, split it into 3 different types. And previously, we've seen some of our clients, they'll do it according to what type of a document it is. All right, maybe they go and make it a subdivision and build everything inside of it, and that's a move towards it. Others will take 1 record for the subdivision and 1 record for all the lots on there. That's another way of doing it. As we've gone through this, we've recognized more and more the power of records. They really are amazing. Once you set them up correctly, and once you bring them in, it really is powerful what you can do and how you interact with them. So let's look at how we're doing this. What we're doing is we're setting up sets of attribute roles. And by design, what we have to do is say that the record's going to store all the information that's common to those parcel types in that record type. So for example, the information that's common to all the cadastral frameworks, we're going to store that in the record. Okay, and then when a parcel type is created or modified, it pulls the information from that record. And I'm going to give a shout out here to Kim, who's sitting here and watching, because she was the first one who said, well, let's start storing information over on the record. Great idea. And it's got me thinking about this. It's like, okay, so if you store it over on that's fine. And then when you create, for example, a subdivision, it pulls the information that's stored in the record over to that subdivision. And then when you go and create a lot inside that subdivision, it should pull from there that information from the record on there. But then we wound up having an issue in that another client said, well, that's fine. But what happens when the information that's stored on the record changes? Because they started using records to go and not just look at the static condition of that record, but they started using it to go and track current subdivisions and proposed subdivisions, so that when you had a proposed subdivision, you would put the information in there and not everything would be populated yet. Instead, you'd have to then go and say, okay, here's when it was recorded, here's the information, the final information on here and all of that. And as that information got updated, that had to get pushed out there again. Most of the time with attribute rules, the triggers are the insert or the modify. So if you stored everything on the record and the record changes, the only way that you could get it to pull that information is if you modified the polygons for the lots, for the subdivisions, for the sections, for whatever it was related to the record, you'd have to go and do that. So you'd have to go and sort of do a pseudo calculations. You'd have to go and recalc the area or something like that. And that kind of worked, but it was very clumsy to work with. So what we did is we said, well, what happens if, why don't we set it up so that when a record is modified, when the record gets modified, it goes and pushes back everything to everything that's related to that record. So that's what we do. We have two sets of attribute rules. One that pulls when an individual parcel type is created or modified, it pulls it from the record. And then when the record gets modified, it's going to take and push it back to everything that's related to that record. Got it? So we're going to create the local government information model in here, separating the parcel types according to what the LGIM says, townships, sections, or first division, second division, special surveys, simultaneous conveyances, conveyance divisions, and then tax parcels and fee simple ownership and encumbrance and the other use. We're going to create that, only putting the minimum amount of attribution that each of those needs, but storing the common information on all of them. Okay, let's look and see how that actually works then. So inside a parcel fabric, and this, by the way, is ArcGIS Pro 3, you will see, for example, that we have ownership layers, and I have them grouped together so that here's my ownership layers here. In this case, just tax parcels and encumbrances is all they wanted to put in here. And then we have simultaneous conveyance layers. We have conveyance divisions and simultaneous conveyances here. And then we have cadastral framework with quarter sections, sections, and townships here. And the reason why I do that is mostly for the demo, but also to make it easier to turn layers on and off, selectability, those sorts of things. So it's another big hint. Once you start using Pro more, you'll find that rather than using the old ArcMap techniques of making things selectable and unselectable and editable and non-editable and such, instead, what you do is you group layers together and you'll say, if I'm not going to work on my cadastral framework, I'm just going to turn them off, not have to worry about them. Or my simultaneous conveyance layers, I'm going to turn those off and not have to worry about them, so that I'm only going to work on my tax parcels, my ownership parcels in here. Just a hint, that's a much more efficient way to work inside a Pro than having to turn and set up every single selectability and everything else on there. And I've seen several clients still using the old ArcMap way of doing things, and it really doesn't work well. So let's go in here. Let's go to our records, and let's look at this layout in here again. And let's go to our fields. Let's always also start editing. So again, the only really big thing about this is we have set up the record types. And if we look at this, our record type actually has a domain. And on that domain, we have cadastral framework, simultaneous conveyances, and we have ownership. And then when we built the structure of the individual record, for example, for the cadastral framework, we went and had these attributes. Those are the only ones that are really common to the PLSS. Now, if you don't have a PLSS in here, you don't have to have that in the records. But the other thing that's important is that you don't have to carry these attributes to all the other layers. You don't have to carry the section, township, and range information in your simultaneous conveyances. All right, the only reason we used to do those was to try to figure out where they were, but that's much easier now. Then when we go to our simultaneous conveyances, we then have these layers. These are specifically for the simultaneous conveyances, the subdivision name, the source of it, the designator, the type of it, and the document reference. And then finally, for the ownership parcels, we have just a reference over to a clerk's office. And we could have put in here something like, well, what type of document it is, but that more was applicable towards what type of a parcel you were going to create as a result of it. It could have been a leasehold interest, it could have been an easement deed, it could have been a fee conveyance, and that goes more with those individual parcel types than it does with the record. Now that we understand how this works or how this is structured in here, let's go look at the initial pulls and let's show it in demonstration. So what I have is I have my ownership layers turned on, everything else, just to let you know, is turned off. So you're not seeing any of it. So I'm only going to be working on these two. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a record. In this record, I'm going to create an ownership type, and I'll just call this, parcel 001. And then in the record type, I'm going to say this is an ownership type. And I can then fill in the other information. And maybe there's a certified or clerk's folio number or something of whatever it is in here. All right. And I can go and fill that in and populate it. I've created the record. It's now active. I have an identifier, which is that name field on the record. So now when I go in here to create this record, all right, let me go and make sure, here we go. So here is my tax parcel. Now, normally in the parcel fabric, you draw lines and you create seeds, and then you go in and you build them. Because I just want to illustrate the impacts on the polygons, I'm not going to go to the whole building process. I'm just going to create tax polygons. All right. Now, when I build the tax polygon and double click it here, if I go over to my attribution here, I will note that in fact it's already pulled from the record what the CFN number is. It's already calculated the acreage on here. So to show you how that works, I'm going to go to my attributes rules and show you that on here, we only have two rules on here. The one is calculate the acreage in the calculated area field. Simple one, everybody's been doing that. But this is the intriguing one, because what this is going to do, this rule, this is a pull rule. We're pulling it from the record. All right, we're going to get the attributes from the record's polygon feature class. And what this does is this uses the relationship between the records and the individual parcel types that are stored in the parcel fabric when you go and build them. Matter of fact, let me go and do this just so we can see that inside of our parcel fabric, when we create a parcel fabric, not only do we create the parcel fabric, but the individual parcel types have polygons and lines, and we wind up with a series of relationship classes. These relationship classes say that the record has connection lines associated with it. The record has conveyance division polygons and lines, and encumbrance polygons and lines. And in this case, the record has tax polygons and the record has tax lines. These relationship classes are what's used to go and traverse back up to the record with this attribute rule. So we're going to go in here and we're going to use in here the feature set by relationship name. This is one of attributes, one of Arcade's ways that we can use a feature set, which is a link over to a layer. And we're going to say that we want to encounter the first record by the way, it's only one, but this is an easy way to find the first one, of the relationship class where the record has tax polygons. So when we do that, then what we're going to do, we're going to go and find that first record, which is the only record. And then we're going to go and say, well, let's do a little error check-in and say, if you don't have a record, then just, quit out of this. And if that record doesn't have a name, quit out of it. Otherwise, go and capture. And this, by the way, is a really interesting part. And we'll get into that with Arcade as we get exploring Arcade more in future workshops, in which we're setting up a dictionary and say that in this dictionary, the reference to docref, which is an attribute field inside of our table, is actually setting up so that it's equal to the record name docref. And then when we're done with setting up this entire dictionary, we can go back and say, okay, now return the result. And the result is going to take all of the attributes that we've done and move them, pull them all from our ATT variable there. Super simple on here. And this is when you're looking at the parcel types and you're traversing up to the record and pulling them down so that now we've got that. And by the way, it's set up to automatically on insert and update to go ahead and pull that information back from the record. So when we've got that in here and it redoes it, for example, if we were to go and make a modifications or a split in here, it would go and do it. When we do a create of, maybe we're creating an easement in here. All right, and when we create that easement, sure enough, it's pulling it back down and creating that easement document or whatever information we've stored in a record that we wanted to pull down, it will go and pull that all down for us, including things like calculating the acreage. And again, this is a really cool tool. And I think, again, I want to give Kim an attaboy on this. She was the first one that said, well, why don't we look at that? So we did that. And then, like I said, we had another client out in New Mexico that said, well, what happens if I want to do it the other way on here? How do I do that? So let me go and stop this. And now let me go and show you that if I go in here and I say, go to the record properties. And remember the record properties, I said, well, wait a minute, that's the wrong CFN. This really is supposed to be 99999 on here. And when I hit enter now, without doing anything else, I can go back here to my easement and look at that. It's already pushed it back now. It pulls it when the individual parcel types get changed. And when the record gets changed, it pushes it back. So that requires a different type of attribute rule. That attribute rule, and let's look at the one for taxes because that's the one we looked at before. So let's look at this one and say that rule instead does this. And this is a little bit more complicated because when we went from the parcel type up to the record, you only have one record, but you have multiple parcel types. So it was a many to one. So you could be sure that if you use the relationship set by name, you would always get that record if it had a record. Well, what happens when you want to push it down? You have to go and find a way to push it down only to those features that are actually related to that record. So you have to do it differently. You can't use the relationship by, or the feature set by relationship. Instead, what you do is you capture, in this case, I'm capturing the global ID. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and look at my tax parcel. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do and create a filter that says that I want to filter in my tax feature class where the created by is equal to the global ID. Now remember, in the parcel fabric, the created by record is the one that stores the global ID of the record. So this sets up a relationship, not by a relationship name, but it instead sets up the relationship by doing a select on here and saying, let's get all the records in that parcel type that has this global ID on it. That's what this is doing. And then again, some error checking in here. And then what it's going to do is it's going to do an update and say, again, we're going to set the same sort of thing. We're going to set an individual dictionary here and say, let's go and return the global ID to make sure that that's going to do the right one. And then let's take the value that's stored in the record document ref and store it in our individual parcel type document rep, and then go ahead and do an edit and push them down into those individual features on there. So a little bit of complication, but this is a really intriguing way of doing it. Granted, it's got a little bit of overhead built in, but it's only working on what's related to that one individual feature and the feature class on there. So let's explore that a little bit more on here. What we did is we only worked on the ownership. Well, let's work on the SIMCONs, on the simultaneous conveyances, and see what we do with this. So let's create a new record, and this new record is going to be sub 001, and it's a record type, which is a simultaneous conveyance type. And what type of a record is this? And certified survey map. I'll do that for you, Kim. Survey number. All right. The source, again, we can put anything in here. The subname. We can put anything in there. And then let's go and just create this record. All right, now we have sub number 1 created. Let's go and create a sub in here. Again, by turning off that other group layer, that's no longer available for me to go and do this. So let's go and do a CSM in here and create the CSM. Once we create the CSM, let's look at the attributes of it. And sure enough, it's pulled the replat of the initial one. It's a CSM in here. Here's the original sub number. Here's the source. And again, I could have filled in this other information on here. I didn't, but that's the way it works. So now what happens when I go and take and create a bunch of lots in here? Well, let's create a lot in here. Let's create another lot in here. Another lot in here. All right, when we look at these, every one of them is pulling the exact same information down from that record. And now when we say select everything in our current record, all right, we'll see that all of them have those stored, and our SIMCON has that stored on there also. To prove it works, let's clear this out and let's go back to the record properties and say, wait a minute, that wasn't a replat. That was the initial plat and it was wrong. It was not a CSM. It's actually a subdivision in here. And again, we can change all of this in here. And as we change this, if we go back here and say, show us everything in the active record, and sure enough, it's now the initial plat with everything changed on here for us. All right. One final demo on here. Let's now turn off our SIMCON. Let's go down to the cadastral layers and open those up and just demonstrate it does exactly the same thing. So that if we go in here and create a new record, all right, and No, let's do this. Let's call this Township 01 North, 03 West. All right, and it's a cadastral framework type, and this is using Michigan, and this is 2 North, and this is 3 West. All right, and let's just create that. Now that we have a record created, let's go and create a township.
Frank, when you have a moment, there's a question in the chat.
Yep. The question was, you said every parcel requires a record. Okay, so does that mean that when converting to a parcel fabric, we should need to create records for all existing parcels? Mike, that's a great question. I'm going to go and show you that often what's happening, I'm as guilty of this as anybody, I assign records to the individual features as I'm doing a migration. Well, to fit it into the LGIM, what you really should do is take your collection and assign that to a record that you created. So I'll show you how to do that, Mike, in a minute. Let's finish with this demo and then we'll get into that. All right. Good question, though. So now we have everything that's in here, the Michigan Meridian. Here's all the information on here. It works. Let's go and create some sections in here. Let's go from here to the sections. Finish this. Let's do another section in here. And just look at the attributes, what that's building. And again, same stuff's getting pulled down here. Let's go down to the second division on here. I'll create a record. Here's a second division in here, which is the quarter sections. All right, and just to show that's doing into the quarter sections even. So it's all working and coming in here. All right. So let's again go back to the record. Let's go and look at here and say, well, wait a minute, this is actually not supposed to be north, it's supposed to be south, and this is supposed to be east. All right. And now let's look at what's happening. And now that's south. Let's watch when it's updating. South and east. Took a while for it to go and do that. So, and all of these should be the same way when we select everything in that active record. They should all be south and east. So yes, this works for when you're building it from scratch. This is a good way of doing it. But what happens when you've already moved into the parcel fabric? And as all of us have done, we've created things where we've assigned all of these elements to it. And we have records, but they're not organized in this way. So how do we retrofit it? So I'm going to delete these out, and I'm going to use this as a good example. I'm going to do one more thing here. I'm going to go and turn off my points on here. So now all I have is I have my cadastral framework turned on. And again, another reason why you would separate these into those areas. So now, let me go in here and say select, and let's just select these components here. Now I can take these components that I've got in here and say, just go and assign those to my new record. So it's going to supersede the previous record that it had been assigned to, and now assign them to this new record instead. So it gives you the ability to go back if you find that this is a really good way of doing things, to go back and retrofit your data once it's been migrated into the parcel fabric. Now, again, do you need to do this? No, but it might be a good thing to do. So the question then is, well, why would I want to do this? well, maybe I want to go and look for, let me get to manage records here. Maybe I want to go and look and find an individual record. Maybe I want to find, township 2 north, 3 west. All right. I can have it go and search through, and there it is there. I can tell it to zoom to that portion of, or assign that to my current record, right click, and I can zoom to those records. I can tell it to select those features in that records so I can immediately go and find them. It's a faster way to organize your elements, a better way to go and get in and for example, find something so that, and the township's a little bit funky, but it's a good way to go and look and be able to get you into that township and then be able to look at the sections inside of there. The record is a good search tool, which means that if you're building a subdivision and you're retrofitting a subdivision where all the lots were set up a certain way, each had their own records, and all the subdivision had its own record, you can select them, create a new record, and assign them to that new record. So now you can retrofit the assignment of the record to that. Okay. There is, however, Mike, one downside to this, and that is while it assigns the selected feature to the record, it does not delete the record, because it might be that you had other things assigned to that record besides what you had selected. So just be aware that it's not going to be removing records that you previously had, but it will be refitting the overall features and better organizing them as you go along. I'm going to come up for a breath of air. We have about 8 minutes left in the grouping here in the workshop. Do we have any comments or questions? Did I completely, confuse you, or did I open up some new thoughts on how we might organize and utilize all the good work that's been done with the local government information model in the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric? Any comments?
No questions or comments in the chat.
Wow. Okay. Well, with that, then I think I'm going to go and cancel and close out and wish you all a great holiday. And please stick around and we can go and talk some more. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.